When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about why you are wrong about Viserys Targaryen, the Viserys of Season 1 of Game of Thrones, or for book readers of, well, A Song of Ice and Fire. Not the Viserys of House of the Dragon. We're going to be talking about why you're wrong about the character, but not for necessarily the way you think. So every time I've been doing these why you are wrongs, it's usually been to say why this character is overhated or all of that kind of stuff. With this character, with Viserys, it's a bit different because I think Viserys is, yes, he should be hated to a degree, right? Because he is this person who abuses his sister, he's kind of a horrible brother, all that kind of stuff. But what I want to prove with this video is more that Viserys is an underappreciated character in terms of how well written that he is. In my opinion, of the first book, he is by far the best character in the Daenerys plotline outside of Daenerys herself. One of the best characters of book one in general. And if you only watched the television show, you maybe didn't really get to see that because of how much we learn about Viserys through, well, extended scenes from the books or being in Daenerys' head as she's recounting how they had to live when they were younger. You don't really get the sense, the full-scale picture of Viserys in the show. Not to say that Viserys is bad in the show by any means. I think Viserys is still a great character in the show, but he's missing a little bit of that extra depth that's there in the book that I want to go through in today's video so that you might have a better appreciation of the character of Viserys than maybe you did before watching this video. So Viserys is a character that already, as soon as we start the story, is the last male Targaryen in his belief, right? Aemon doesn't count. He's at the wall. He can't claim anything. He's too old anyway. Jon, nobody knows is actually a Targaryen, if he even is one. Young Griff is not a thing, and I believe he's a Blackfire, so I don't think he's actually a Targaryen, even though he has Targaryen blood because he's a Blackfire. Viserys, in a lot of ways, from a very young age, has all the pressure of being the last claimant to House Targaryen, outside of Daenerys, but again, with the way that Westeros views men and women, Viserys has all the pressure of bringing back the Targaryen dynasty. And so that's something that's really difficult to put on his shoulders at such a young age. But then also think about it from this point of view as well. Different than Daenerys. Daenerys did not get to meet her father. She never knew him. She didn't really know her mother either. So Daenerys grew up without parents, basically. So Viserys was in such a tough position because in a lot of ways, he had to be a brother to Daenerys, but also almost had to be her parent, even though that was fulfilled by Willem Darry. Even after Willem Darry's death, Viserys kind of had to take that mantle as well. But Viserys, unfortunately, had to interact with characters like the Mad King. He got to see the Mad King as a child, and so he grew into a little bit of those qualities that his father had. And Viserys, I think, is somebody that is a lot more, that based upon the way that he grew up, defined a lot more of his personality, very similar to Daenerys. Think about the way Daenerys starts at Game of Thrones, where she's more timid. She's a bit more unconfident, and that's based upon the fact that, okay, she's been on the run all these different years. She's been put down by her brother. Her brother's very overwhelming on her, all those kind of things. Viserys is kind of the opposite. So Viserys has to be the person in charge. And so when they leave Dragonstone and they go into more or less hiding, and we're told the story that we know is that they basically went to Braavos, and for a while they were able to be there and grow up a little bit. Daenerys remembers her fondest memories at Braavos, but eventually Willem Darry dies, and Viserys and Daenerys are forced to go on the run. Now we know that there actually weren't hired knives being sent after Viserys at this time. That really only happens until we get to the main story, when Robert then finally, says, hey, we need to get rid of these kids. Daenerys is reproducing with Khal Drogo. We got to get rid of them. That wasn't necessarily happening. But for Viserys, you had to think that was. Think about what happened to your entire family and Robert being at the head of all that, being the king after your family's demise. He always looking over his shoulder, always thinking, maybe somebody's going to be coming after me. I've got to, switch places all the time. And eventually it also gets to the point where, as the years go by, and Viserys, at such a young age, he's only a kid, isn't able to gain any support, isn't able to take back Westeros, he loses more and more of himself as he's basically having to sell himself, to beg just to live, just to have food, just for normal, human, decent things to live. And remember, he's doing all of this while being a kid, having really no parental figures in his most formative years in terms of becoming a teenager, and all while having to look over for his sister, all of that stuff. And so you put all these things together, right? The pressure of trying to bring back the Targaryen dynasty, the pressure of having to look over your shoulder all of the time, being forced into a situation that he was not ready for. He was way too young to be trying to be basically a parent to Daenerys and all this stuff. And I'm not here to say that Viserys is a hero, but I will say I think that we should feel sad for Viserys because of how he grows up and because of how the circumstances and the family that he had shaped him into the individual that he would become. And so when you think about as we get closer to the normal story, and Viserys is very arrogant, he's not the most intelligent person, he's overbearing on his sister, you think about everything that Viserys has wanted pretty much his entire life was just to be recognized, to get any of the love that he thinks that he deserves, because he should be the rightful king to the Iron Throne, being a Targaryen. And even his father was willing to name him over Rhaegar because of all the things that Rhaegar was doing. It looked like he was trying to usurp his father. So when we look at all this stuff and we get to the normal story, you can appreciate Viserys a lot more, especially on a reread, because you can have all that in the back of your mind, of all these things that shape Viserys into the person that he is. He's so desperate, and he's so much overburdened with trying to become king and trying to get back the Targaryen dynasty, to make his father proud and all of this stuff, that he's willing to sell his own sister into the Dothraki culture, which he looks down upon, and he is horrible towards looking at other cultures. He thinks them barbaric, which I want to point this out. Yes, Viserys is not the best guy, but if you ask the average Westeros person what they thought of the Dothraki, they would share basically the same opinion as Viserys. Daenerys is smarter than Viserys because she realizes that she has to integrate into their culture. She has to, accept her new life because that's the only way she's going to survive. Viserys doesn't understand that. And so as time goes on for Viserys and Daenerys is growing more into their culture, she's gaining more respect and more love from the Dothraki people, it's weighing on Viserys, because Viserys at no point in his life has ever felt what Daenerys has. The scene in the show where you see Viserys talking to Jorah about right after Daenerys has eaten the horse's heart and she's getting all this approval and her son's being prophesized to be the stallion who mounts the world, Viserys has never felt that his entire life. And we all can see that, okay, well, Viserys hasn't earned any of that. He hasn't done anything to garner that. But you can't help, especially for me on a reread, feel bad for Viserys, because if things had just gone differently in his life from his early years, he could have been a much different and changed man. But because of the cruel way the world, works and goes, it turned him into this horrible brother who is very misguided in his actions, the way he treats his sister, even when his sister is trying to help him. You think about the gifts that she gives him to try and get him to integrate into the Dothraki culture, to try and get him to act more in a way that the Dothraki will respect. And he pushes all of that away until he becomes so desperate that he's trying to steal dragon eggs from his sister, that he's trying to threaten his sister to try and get this crown that has been promised to him by the Dothraki, and it all blows up in his face, and he dies in one of the most brutal fashions in the entire series. In a very poetic fashion, all he's ever wanted was respect, to be cared about, and to be seen as a king. And he goes out he gets his golden crown, I guess, and dies. Viserys is such an impactful character because not only is he huge for Daenerys' first half of her arc in Game of Thrones, he has a lingering presence in Daenerys' arc the entire time. And even Daenerys comes to the same conclusion that we are talking about in this video. In Book 2, when she's at Qarth, she starts to feel like a beggar. She starts to understand her brother and what drove him to be so horrible to her, because of the frustration, because of how begging made her feel that she was worthless and just being used and paraded around so people could see her and her dragons. Viserys is a lingering presence that defines Daenerys in every single book, and she looks back on him all the time. And that's the recipe for a great character, that even after, it's been over 2 or 3 books after Viserys' death, and Daenerys still thinks about him. That he still holds a role in her life and dictating how she goes about doing certain actions. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think that in Winds of Winter, we could easily see her going to Pentos. Well, not easily, she has a lot to do, but I mean, on her way back to Westeros, I think I could see her going back to Pentos. And even with her going to the Dothraki, it's going to bring up and make her remember about Viserys' death. And I also think Westeros will question Viserys' death. Arianne in her Winds of Winter sample chapter thinks about Viserys' death and how brutal that was. How could a sister watch her brother die like that? Those are the questions that will be at the forefront for Daenerys as we move through the story. But thank you guys all for watching. I just wanted to bring up Viserys because I was thinking about who I wanted to do next in this series of why you're maybe wrong about a character. And Viserys is always one that stuck out for me because he was a favorite of my Game of Thrones reread. And I've been re-editing some stuff for the second channel, putting some stuff on there. And every once in a while, you just kind of go back and you look at what your thoughts are on certain stuff. And Viserys, I won't lie, is a favorite of mine. I don't love him as a person, but I love the way George writes the character and the way he's so interesting to look at. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about Viserys. I know there's a lot of people that really hate him, and I hope maybe this shines some light onto why I think he's such a good character. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.